Hello everyone, and welcome back for another installment of F1 2019 in our second season here. We come into our race in Austria just fresh off of a podium that we had to fight our way for at the tail end of France as our tires were falling off. But now we're headed out to the Red Bull Ring, which is a personal favorite of mine, and we are sitting P5 in the championship standings right now. So we're definitely launching our way up the tables pretty quickly. And we're hoping to continue this solid form. So we have one development that's completed, and we have a rainy, wet race coming up. Pretty dry qualifying, but rain pretty much the entire race except for the very tail end. So that's going to make for some interesting strategy decisions. Obviously, you know, throughout this series so far, I've kind of struggled a little bit in the rain department, except for last year's race at Red Bull Ring here in Austria. Had a pretty good go around that track in the wet, so I'm feeling all right about it. So hopefully if I can keep myself in a good position throughout the wet phase and have a good charge at the tail end of the race. But it's mostly going to be racing well in the wet there. As you can see on the development chart, Ferrari's flattening back out. Renault takes a pretty big leap. Same with Racing Point. McLaren is kind of flatlined a little bit here. But definitely the midfield is starting to group up as we chase down. Red Bull is just way away at the top. I mean, just way beyond everyone else. That car is an absolute rocket, and Max Verstappen is definitely making his presence known in the championship chase so far this season. So we're going to go ahead and pop into our parts section here. You can see some stuff getting pretty worn out, the ICE especially. So we're going to go ahead and run some of our more worn parts just for the practices and qualies, and then we'll put some fresher bits in for the race. But let's head out to qualifying now.
Thank you for joining us once again for today's qualifying session. Sit back, relax, and enjoy what we hope will be a fantastic contest for pole position. Now then, Anthony Davidson, you're not getting any younger, but you have been involved in your fair share of qualifying sessions in an illustrious 30-year career. How do you deal with the pressure when you have that one chance to deliver a perfect lap?
It's not so much about dealing with the pressure, it's more about how you approach the risk and just how much of it are you willing to take. You're constantly balancing the car on the edge of grip from braking, cornering and traction. And over the course of a lap, it's easy to get that balance wrong. And that's why achieving the perfect lap is almost impossible. As you say, I've been doing this 30 years now, and it never gets any easier.
All right, so here we are for our first laps of Q1 coming around the track this time. You know, nice and sunny in qualifying to start with. We are running a pretty high downforce setup. I mean, definitely really leaning into the fact that the race is going to be wet most of the way through. Didn't want to compromise it too much, but it's a track that I've run pretty well around just in general. So I'm feeling pretty good about my chances in this qualifying to put ourselves in a good position at the start of the race. But Q1 is just a matter of getting through as usual, so I'm not too worried about what tires we're using or what strategies we're going through after our first lap there. You see we set the fastest early time there, but as we hop through to the very end, we are P6, so very easily through into the second qualifying session. And so we'll hop out here into Q2. This stage, we don't have to worry about trying to make it through Q2 on a different tire to have ourselves some tire choice strategies. Obviously, since it's going to be a wet race, we are not bound by that Q2 tire rule. So we're just putting our first banker out on a set of the softs as opposed to going out on the mediums. And then as we jump ahead to the tail end of Q2, we see we've fallen right next to the cut line. We're out on another set of softs. We're sitting P10 at the moment, but we're just going to go ahead and improve this time around after the track is all rubbered in. And see where we end up. P4, so comfortably into Q3 as well. Obviously, we wouldn't have been able to keep the banker time. I think we would have gotten pushed out just barely, but we are midway through the pack in that Q3 group. And so now it's just going to be a matter of putting in a good time in Q3 and putting ourselves as high up the chart as we possibly can. Now, so one thing I did do thinking tire strategy later in the race, I wanted to make sure I had a fresh set of soft tires for the very end of the actual race, because it's supposed to be only a teeny tiny little window of time that it's going to be dry at the very end of the race. So I put on one of my Q2 soft sets that only had the one hot lap on it, so they are still in pretty good shape to put in my first banker time. And then obviously we have the extra set of soft tires that are given, freely to all of the cars that make Q3, which we'll use to put in our final lap of the session. So here we are out at the final lap. We're going to have the last few cars passing just ahead of us. We're getting pushed down the order. We were sitting P1, but now down to 4th. Only a couple more corners to go. We'll see where we get pushed into as we cross the line. A little wide on that final exit, but just a teeny bit of improvement crossing the line there. See if that gives us a position or not. Yep, there we are, P3. So we managed to start on the second row there. It's a pretty solid position to be starting in.
We're all ready for tomorrow's race, but before we begin, let's have a quick look at those who will be fronting the grid. Verstappen, Bottas and Oldtimer. With qualifying wrapped up, we now have our grid lineup for the big race tomorrow. Be sure to join us then for what will no doubt be a fantastic race.
Just like a half a tenth off of P2, very close to coming in on that front row, but just not quite enough. Makes me really think if I had done this part switch of the ICE before the qualifying session, if I maybe had that extra, half a tenth in the engine and in the worn components. But now that that engine number 4 is pretty much toast, it's over 70% wear, so we're going to go ahead and pretty much retire it until we take another engine penalty to get a new fresh one later on in the season, hopefully. But so we're going to go ahead and throw on a new MGUK, which was also starting to show a little bit of wear. MGUH is in fine shape. The energy store is just over 50%, which is where it starts to lose some of its energy. And I kind of waffled back and forth. I ended up sticking with the original energy store. I think this will be the actual last race I run on that energy store, because throughout the qualifying session, I was, with the worn energy store, you lose maximum charge capacity. Had still about 92%, so that should get me through the race just all right in the rain.
What a beautiful backdrop to a motor race. We're here in the Styrian Mountains, of course, and they've watched over some cracking races throughout the history of this Grand Prix. Controversy, of course, think back to 2002, but also great joy. Do you remember Niki Lauda's historic home victory in 1984? It's a short lap here in Spielberg with just 10 corners, 7 rights and 3 lefts, making up the total distance of 2.6 miles. And expect to see a lot of cars running wide today, especially through the last corner, as the wet conditions make the cars skittish through the downhill sections. Anthony Davidson, a very warm welcome to you as you join me in the commentary box for today's event. Let's have a chat about Williams. What do you make of their performance so far this season?
Well, the atmosphere within that team seems very positive at the moment. Everyone seems like they're in great spirits and having a lot of fun doing what they do, and that's definitely contributed to the performances we've seen.
Off the back of a fantastic qualifying session, it's time to see how our starting grid looks for today's race. Max Verstappen put in a fantastic lap yesterday, and he starts from pole position, and Valtteri Bottas will line up alongside. Considering the rest of the grid, we have Oldtimer, Vettel, Antonio Giovinazzi, and Gasly, Perez, Weber, Norris, and Carlos Sainz. Butler, Leclerc, Lance Stroll, and Hamilton, Magnussen, Grosjean, Daniel Ricciardo, and Kimi Raikkonen. Russell and Alexander Albon picks up the last spot on the grid. And with preparations almost complete, let's head down to the track.
Now that we've got some points on the board, let's continue this form and aim for another top 10 finish.
So here we are, the light rain dropping down on our car as we sit on the grid in that second row just behind the pole sitter. No penalties ahead of us, unfortunately, to give us that free promotion up to the second spot. You can see me dial up a little bit of extra front wing for the wet conditions. We're making some adjustments to our differential and brake biasing as well. Stuff that we're allowed to change in the Parc Fermé conditions here on the starting grid. Like I said, we kind of had a pretty compromised setup in the qualifying session, so I'm actually pretty glad for how high up we managed to qualify while running a pretty high downforce setup. Because, you know, obviously I'd rather do it for the race. And here I'm in here trying to see if I can put in the soft tire at the tail end, but it only allows you to adjust your stints for the current conditions. It would be nice in the strategy planning to be able to say, yeah, it's going to dry up at the end. Let me put a dry tire on at the tail end there. But right now we're looking to try and split the rainy section, which should go most of the race, kind of in half and leave probably another 4 or 5 laps of dry tire running at the very end. Now, obviously, that could change depending on how the rain plays out over the course of the actual race. But that's kind of my thought process here, is try and keep as fresh of a set of inters on as possible while only making one stop in the wet and then making that last switch off to the dry tire. But here we go. Lights drop and we get away very gingerly as the tires spin in the wet. And then trying to put on throttle in 4th gear, still kind of the back end's getting away from me there. But we swing, we cover the outside as Vettel tries to dive the inside. It has a little bit of contact through the corner, but you know, we literally couldn't give him any more space. We were all the way around the outside edge there, but we're able to get pretty easily clear up there. And Valtteri Bottas is pretty tight on Verstappen at the start here. You see the caution flag come out at the very beginning of that hairpin, just because everybody's bunched up and everybody's moving so slow to get through there in that wet condition. The game actually thinks that it's, you know, somebody stopped. But we managed to pretty early on. We're not going to run a full lap here side by side. Everybody kind of slots in and settles into the race very early on compared to a dry race. There's really not many extra lines you can run in this situation here, so it's just kind of a matter of showing good pace throughout here and trying to stay with this lead group. I mean, we're starting in a podium position, so the podium should be on. You know, maybe a good chance at a back-to-back after picking up the podium in France. You know, I think we've got a good shot here at the Red Bull Ring. Now, one thing that happens in the wet weather is you spend a lot more time. Obviously, you're braking early, but also on, you know, partial throttle. So you actually end up recharging your ERS, your electric deployment, a lot more than you would in a dry situation. So you can typically run in a slightly higher deployment mode than you would for the rest of for a dry race, because you're saving so much energy. But you can see right now with the ERS, it kind of is topping out at around 90% with that wear. You can see that bar is starting to stretch its way down the deployment line. But even with a few errors here and there, we're actually managing to keep pace with Bottas and Verstappen in front as well. So it's going to be a matter of, if we can stay pretty mistake-free, we might be able to close up and make an overtake in these wet conditions. But it's just kind of a matter of not pushing the car too hard and kind of settling into the way the car behaves on this wet circuit. And again, for whatever reason, even though I'm not particularly great in the wet at other tracks, I say, shoot, I would even consider myself below average in the wet at other tracks. I still seem to put in pretty decent times, at least compared to this AI around Red Bull Ring in the wet. It's probably has a lot to do with the fact that it's not got very many corners. Definitely mostly just a few right-handers, some long straights out there. But, you know, being very gentle on the throttle, not spinning the tires up too much is really where you make all of your time around this particular track. It looks like Max is starting to get a little bit of a gap out in front there as we kind of power slide our way through the corner. Having to do a lot of playing around with the brake balance in the wet here. If you're not very heavily shifted forward, you tend to lock the rears, and then the back end kind of steps out as we kind of slalom our way through the Sector 2 brake there. But we managed to get back on the throttle. It's nothing too costly, but we were starting to close up on the Mercedes in front of us. Luckily for Max Verstappen in front of us. Lewis Hamilton is starting his way pretty far down the grid. I believe P14 is where he's starting, so he's going to have to do a lot of charging through the grid, and that has a potential to really hurt his championship hopes. It's not a great situation, especially if with Max leading. So unless Verstappen has a DNF or a failure, he's looking to be very much in position for a podium finish here, and Lewis is really going to have to work his way up and down through there. But here we are. We've closed up on Bottas here, lap 6. We get a good run down the start-finish straight. Obviously, no DRS in the rain. We're going to have to do it the old-fashioned way. We're leaving a little bit of room on the inside there. Barely trying to avoid contact coming through the apex, but we managed to hang it out around the outside and get pretty well clear of him. Now, with him being pinched down to the apex around that corner, having to take a tighter exit, especially in these wet conditions, you can see just how much of a gap he's opened up behind us already. He wasn't able to get on the throttle very well, and really is falling back pretty quickly. So now it's a matter of trying to chase down Max, which we occasionally see entering the turn as we go over the hill. He's got a few seconds of a lead in front of us at this stage. You see just the wetness of the track, how hard it is to get the nose in, and that's again why we added that extra click of front downforce on the wing to try to get that nose to turn into the corners. I mean, obviously you can kind of control the back end in the wet with the throttle a little bit, but the nose, if it doesn't turn, you're just going straight. And you can see how wide we run in some of these corners with that understeer, you know, not letting us get the nose around into a corner. But at this stage of the race, it's just a matter of kind of trying to settle in, make as few mistakes as possible. Maybe we have a chance of, if we're running well, of reeling in Verstappen. I don't know what kind of setup he's running, if he's running a dry or wet setup. Regardless, he's fast. I mean, that Red Bull has really had some serious improvements at the start of Season 2 in the development charts and is just absolutely taken off.
The track is drying, but it's going to take a while to clear the standing water off the line. Don't start thinking about slicks just yet.
And here we are on lap 8 already. We're getting news from Jeff that although the rain hasn't stopped yet, the track is drying up, and you can actually see that kind of drier line forming in front of us. So it's possible that we may not have to run so deep to get onto the softs there. But we hop ahead a little bit. Lap 11, you can see, you know, green in the first sector, purple in the second sector. The track is really drying up, and we set the fastest lap of the race there. But the rain is still coming, but he said only 5 to 10 more minutes. So we're looking at you know, the rain stopping around lap, you know, 18 to 20, somewhere in that ballpark. So at this point, our original strategy of going 2 inters onto softs at the very end, it's not really looking like the actual move. We may have a drier track much earlier. So now it's a matter of just kind of feeling that out. I mean, our original pit window was lap 16, so we'll see if how the rain and how the track is drying out at that stage, and make a determination on what we're going to do. We may have a chance to kind of strategize on the fly here, because if the track is dried up enough, and you know, we're only having to push, you know, lap 18, 19, and the track's really, you know, dry tire ready, we could go onto a set of the hards probably and get to the end of the race pretty comfortably, switching onto a dry tire. And I think everybody else in the AI group is probably going to go with what the default strategy is, which is a 2-stop. Well, I guess a 1-stop, but then, you know, a second stop onto dries if that's the case at the end of the race here. So at this kind of junction in the race, I'm kind of just feeling out where my tires are at, feeling out how the track is drying, seeing if the inters are wearing down too quickly. It's really just kind of settling in and running my own race. I'm not worried too much about trying to chase down Verstappen at this point, but with the news that the rain is going to be stopping a lot earlier than was expected in the forecast, my thought now is a 1-stop. Go from the inters onto a dry tire, finish the race on that dry tire. But again, it's going to come down to, if the track dries out too fast, we could burn up the inters a little bit too much before the dry switch. and have to make a stop to get some fresh inters. But very much a strategy up in the air at this point. It's not a particularly been a particularly exciting on-track race thus far. We basically had the start. We had one little fight with Valtteri on lap 6 there, and otherwise we're just kind of settled in, cruising, doing our laps, trying not to fall too far behind Verstappen here. We'll see what we're behind him as we cross the line here. We're about 5 seconds back of him.
We're expecting you in around 2 laps, and we'll be putting you on the intermediate tyres.
Yeah, about 2 laps till the original pit stop strategy. And
looks like the weather is going to dry up in about 5 minutes. Inters look like the best time.
Yep, still looking like 5 minutes till drying up. And at this point in the race, almost every lap down the main straight, I'm popping up my radio, asking Jeff how much longer is the rain going to be here, trying to see what we can get to. And now I'm thinking, you see me pull open the menu, next tires at the stage, thinking the hards, because if it's only 5 more minutes, we're going to have about 15 laps to go. Getting there, and you see we've got about 40% wear on that back left, which is the one that's taking the most load out of those slow acceleration corners. So that's the one to really watch for our wear.
Okay, we think the effects of the tyre deg are going to kick in soon. We should be alright for the time being, but you will start to find it a bit more slippery out there.
No, it's definitely getting a little more slippery, but also a little less slippery because the track is starting to dry out. At this point, you see we're 12 seconds clear of Valtteri behind us, so he's really kind of fallen off behind. Not too much to worry about. A little bit of wheel spin as we head down the main straight, but we hop ahead lap 18. We were due in this lap, but the rain is completely stopped. So now I'm just trying to get the car to get the street dried out. Use these intermediate tires to clear as much water off the racing line as possible. Even with the extra wear, you see we're only a half second off of our best lap so far. We're still running, still have the fastest lap, and Verstappen has already dove in, and he's grabbing another set of intermediates. So at this point, I'm definitely looking to go for onto the dry tires, and only make one stop, because he's going to have to make another stop at the tail end of this race to get a new set of tires on.
Our gap behind is 12.0 seconds. They're on fresh inters.
Alright, so we're on much more worn tires, the same type, but he's 12 seconds back. So we're going to hop ahead. Lap 22, we've continued to push on another 4 laps on these worn inters. Verstappen now sets the fastest lap of the race. He's still 10.2 behind us, so we've got pretty good gap behind us. He's not closing us up too fast. A little lock up there into the hairpin, but through the first sector break, we're actually up on our best time. So even with, very worn tires, we're putting in better and better laps. So we're kind of skirting the line between, tire wear and the track drying. And so at this stage, I'm just going to, until I see that time start to drop back off again, I plan on running these inters until I can get onto the softest tire possible, which, again, I saved that set of fresh soft tires in the qualifier for this particular reason. 4.4 seconds up on the on our best lap there. Verstappen has taken best lap back from us. We're going to go ahead and hop another couple laps ahead. Lap 26 here as we come through, and now we're starting to lose a little bit of pace. 3/10 down in that first sector. Verstappen is still got the fastest lap race. He's only 7.8 seconds behind us now. But here you go. You see Jeff saying we've got a new strategy available. We can finally get on those softs. So we're going to come in, box this lap, be the first car onto a dry tire, and hopefully the track is drying up fast enough where we're not going to lose too much time in that transition as we grab a slick tire on the still slightly damp track. But at this point, I think my intermediates were at about 82% was what the rear left was. So really getting into dangerous territory and a lot of wear. So a lot of lost grip there. And so it's definitely a good time to dive in. Obviously, we're not going to want to come get another set of inners. So we're just going to have to nurse around this set of dry tires for the first time around until that track starts to really dry up. So we'll see if that gains or loses us track position based on what Verstappen does on his. But you can hear him going by there. See him just flash past, but he's still got another stop to make. So if we can make good ground on these slick tires, we've got a shot. The race win is a possibility. And we've opened up such a huge gap to the cars behind us. When you see Lucas is now in third place, but you see him out of wheel spin, even half throttle in third gear, getting out of the pit lane. Just still a very squirrely car on these dry tires, having to brake earlier. So we're about 14 seconds back of Verstappen. We're 36 seconds up on third place. So really it turned into very much a two-car race by the tail end of this particular trip. And it's very surprising to see the Alfa Romeo. I mean, obviously the AI for our old teammate is pretty darn strong if he's coming through P3 in a car that's pretty much towards the bottom of the development chart. And you see just how slippy the car is as we come through this last sector. Obviously we're losing a fair bit of time to Verstappen on his inters. We've got a lapped car behind us, so nothing to worry about there. It's Devin Butler, I believe. We've still got a good, 20 seconds or so to Weber behind us. See where he's at the Sector 2 split. Should be coming through just about now. 16.5, so he picked up about 2.5 seconds between the Sector 2, Sector 3's splits. But let's hop ahead. Lap 30, the track is really starting to dry out now. You see we're set purple first and second sector, about 1.5 seconds better than our old best lap. Really took a couple times around to get the feel. Lucas is 15 seconds back, so we're kind of settling in. Verstappen is just now starting to come out of the pits. He is on to his dry tires, so we take the fastest lap of the race away from him, but now we've got to try and chase him down. So we'll see what the gap is when we cross this Sector 1 split, see how much ground we have to chase down, and we'll get a good idea of what kind of setup he's running. See, one of the Renaults is out there. We're about 3.7 back. Pierre Gasly is out of the session. But now it's a matter of really trying to push on, see if we can chase him down. I mean, 3 seconds over the next 5 laps, it's not insurmountable. But we are running a wet setup, essentially, so we have a good chance of trying to catch him up, but we'll see where he is once his tires are up to temperature. Yeah, see, 1 sector split, he's picked up to 4.7. So he's gained almost a full second on us there, and that's kind of the way the tail end of this race is gonna go. Is he's just got amazing pace in that Red Bull. We'll take a little bit of a warning for corner cutting there. Yeah, 4.7 there.
Great work. That's a new fastest lap.
So we took away the fastest lap from him, but now he's got a full flying lap on those dry tires. Should have him pretty much up to temperature at this stage, and the track is pretty well dried up. It was really interesting running the tail end of this race, going from that wet to dry on the dry tire. Just every single lap. I mean, me and Verstappen were essentially trading fastest laps over and over, because the track would be a little bit drier for each person each lap, and it was really just the track was getting faster and faster and faster until we got to the tail stages of this race, in which case the Red Bull just became an absolute missile. They must have been running a little bit more of a less compromised setup, because I definitely had a strong pace in the wet, but in the dry they definitely ran much faster. I wasn't getting as good of lap times as I was in practice sessions compared to what I was doing in the race, because in the practice I was playing around with what would get me a good high speed setup. Luckily we actually had a wet session in practice where it was light rain, so I did get some time to play around with setups that would be wet race viable, as well, as opposed to having to kind of take a guess and figure it out on the fly. So I was able to run and practice with a little bit higher ride height, a little bit higher wing, and see what my general lap times would be there. But definitely, dry to dry setup was much slower on this setup versus my best dry setups, during practice sessions. But Verstappen is taking fastest lap away from
At the
us.
moment, the car behind us is lapping faster than us by around 1 second per lap.
Jeff says Lucas is running about a second a lap faster, but here we are, 7.2 seconds back of Verstappen. We got a 31-second lead though on Lucas. So 3 laps to go, nothing to worry about. Sebastian Vettel is out in his Ferrari, another DNF for
There's
him,
3 laps of fuel
unfortunately.
remaining.
Verstappen just set a new fastest lap. We set a personal best. And we're going to go ahead and hop ahead to the final lap of the race. You can see Verstappen crosses the line with the win there. We are green in our first 2 sectors, so we're going to set a personal best on the final lap as well. But we come P2 for another back-to-back
Yes,
podium.
that's a podium. Excellent drive. The team have worked especially hard this weekend, and this is a fantastic reward.
Red Bull pulling out all the stops today. What a great win. What do you think it was, Ant, that gave them the edge over the competition today?
Well, they certainly stood out as a drive with tons of confidence on the track. I think their ability to keep their cool, even during some of the more hectic parts of the race, meant they were able to capitalise on the mistakes of other drivers, giving them the opportunity to make their way to the top spot with ease.
Here come today's winners. The team at Red Bull have done a phenomenal job recently. It's clear to see that they've put in the work, and they should be proud of the victory they secured here. And after this round of the World Championship, here's how things look in the drivers' table. It wasn't the best weekend for our championship leader, and their advantage at the top has been reduced. Some amazing talents out on the track today, but Anthony, who would you pick as your driver of the day?
Well, for me, it's got to be Lewis Hamilton. The multiple world champion may be the boring choice at this point, but you can't argue that he's a driver deserving of his reputation.
It's time to check out the constructors' standings. The current championship leaders still hold top spot, but that gap is getting smaller. Well, Ants, an end to another fantastic weekend of racing. Thanks to everyone who joined us, and we'll see you for the next one.
You can see how slow our best lap is compared to some of the other top runners, a lot in the 107 area, and then obviously Verstappen, a 107
Great work
flat,
out
almost
there
a
today.
second and a half
Let's have your
faster than our
thoughts.
personal best there. So absolute
You
rocket.
must be thrilled to be up on the podium.
Yeah, I was thrilled to be on there, but I'm expecting it at this one. I started P3. I expected to be on the podium.
You really looked in control of your car out there. Your team must be thrilled.
Yeah, and I'm thrilled with their support during the race. I mean, we try to run as few pit stops as possible in our usual strategies, but
That was a
still
good
like having
race
them
for
there. They're
Lucas.
good.
Are you pleased to see him doing well?
Yeah, it's good to see his hard work and dedication pay off. I mean, they're definitely in a car that's struggling developmentally, but he's having a pretty good season back there with his skill.
You and Lucas weren't far apart by the finish. Do you enjoy racing against him?
I mean, I do, but racing anyone's enjoyable in a car as well balanced as this one.
Great.
I
Well,
don't-
that's everything.
I don't know that I ever really raced him. I mean, he was 30 seconds back of me. But so here we are back in the garage here. We've got some R&D points to play around with and spend here in this sector. So we'll continue to look to develop our chassis department and keep that going in the right direction there. We're going to go with a minor upgrade because we have a few majors in the works. And don't want to spend too much on it. And I want more upgrades to come a little quicker as well. We're going to take a peek into our engine development as well. Looks like we can, even though we're second on the grid right now in that development area, we definitely want to keep that moving as being our most underdeveloped. We got about 540 points to go. So we're going to go ahead and actually take a look into our durability department, which we've put very little effort into so far. And definitely it's going to be a good idea to throw an extra durability development on the ICE, because that's the part of the car for me that wears out the fastest, aside from the gearbox. But now the gearbox has a few upgrades, should be able to survive pretty much regardless now. So got a lot of developments in progress here. Two or three should be there by Britain, and then another we got waiting for Germany. Let's see, we got about 5 races in, 65% gearbox wear. It's gonna be cutting it close. We may see some issues in the next race, but I'm gonna run this current gearbox, not take the penalty. I wanna prove that we can get through that 6 races without the penalty. And with Valtteri's poor day there, you see we've actually leapfrogged him in the standings. We are up now, and Leclerc, in fact, we are up now to P3 in the Drivers' Championship. So that's a huge move for us to be, fighting. It's at this stage of the season, it's a 2-horse race between Hamilton and Verstappen. They're just head and shoulders above everyone else. But maybe if we can pick up a win here or there, we might be able to start reeling them in. But that's the end of this episode here. Thank you for joining me once again as we get ready to head to our Constructors' Home race at Silverstone. See you guys.